So Doron, welcome to our podcast, which is called The Power of Hope. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting that following the previous intervention we have witnessed in terms of impact of our lives, of a very well presence of the people you need when you are a survivor, make us think of what would be the stories you have collected and researched and seen in your work, and you can share with us in order for other people to understand better a little what is a good practice, what would you see and can you share with us?
Yes, of course. So firstly, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to share. So at the OECD, we really look across OECD countries and we look at what countries are doing on gender-based violence. And as I mentioned yesterday, we've seen this really remarkable increase in the prioritization by governments of this issue. So we ask countries fairly regularly what their top 3 most pressing gender equality priorities are. When we first ran that survey in 2016, already about 68% of countries said that this was a top 3 priority for them. Fast forward to already quite high.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2024, by now, almost 9 out of 10 countries say that it's one of their most pressing gender equality priorities. So we've seen this really remarkable increase in prioritization. And it makes us wonder, what more do we need to do really to bring an end to this violence?
Because it's clear much more awareness now in terms of prioritizing this.
Exactly.
But it's not always, priority is always when you see the resources who are there.
Yes.
Because sometimes you can say it's a very important, very high on our agenda, but no money for services or no money.
Yes.
So what would you, so you said.
I completely agree with you. I think now we need to ask exactly how do we translate that prioritization into action? How do we translate that into the action that we need to see on the ground to bring about the changes that are needed to end this violence? For that we need reliable, sustainable funding to back up that commitment so that services know that they have the money they need to provide the services.
Have you seen any model functioning, like having sustainable?
So what we have seen, we've seen some really interesting practices across countries in how they are providing support for victim survivors. And really what we want to make sure is that this is a cross-sectoral approach that really pulls across different levels of government and different types of services. Because we know that the causes and consequences of violence go far beyond the scope of any one sector to address. And so really what we need is this cross-sectoral and multidisciplinary approach that really brings together different people.
And have you seen, I don't know, because we have talked with several people and there is always very difficult to connect, not people are easy to connect, but institutions and protocols. So that is one thing, and the second one would be like, how would sustainable funding look like?
Absolutely. Okay, let me start with the first question about how you bring people together, because I agree with you, it's really challenging. There are all sorts of barriers between sectors, whether it's governance, whether it's IT, whether it's funding structures, but we have seen some really interesting examples across OECD countries. I think the family justice centers that we're talking about are a really good example of bringing people together. But for example, if I think about, information sharing. So we know that that's a very consistent challenge to be able to share information across different sectors. So what we've seen a lot of countries focus on information sharing processes and also on mechanisms, so the hardware, if you like.
And how you go.
Exactly. And so if we think about processes, sometimes co-location has been very effective in countries. So this is where you have, for example, one place where you have a police officer and a health representative and someone from social welfare, and they're working together to make sure that you can share information. But in other times, it's bringing together disparate services in a process. So we know that multi-agency risk assessment conferences play a pretty important role. But really underlying that, I think now more countries are starting to focus on how do we make sure that the infrastructure helps us to do that, because otherwise you really have these individual professionals sort of battling, you know, battling.
They have a different level of connection.
Yes, exactly. So we see some countries are doing some very interesting work. So, for example, Portugal is working on a database that would effectively allow professionals to more easily centralize information and to share it across sectors with the victim survivor's consent, of course. And Iceland and the Ministry of Health are working on an electronic register that they could put into electronic health records that would support more easy referrals, let's say, between the health sectors and to other, including police and judiciary. That's their long-term goal anyway.
Yes, but that's a start.
It's a start, exactly.
And on the sustainable funding model?
Sustainable funding model, exactly. So I think, I mean, first and foremost, you need a political will to make that happen. And you need to see that translated into policy. Because, I mean, funding is one of the top side concerns that we hear from providers. In short, they don't know when the funding is going to run out, and that affects their ability to provide services. So really, it's this policy commitment, and then, I mean, the budget cycle varies from country to country.
So the last question, it would
Of
be,
course.
you know that there are a lot of countries, not a lot, a couple of countries who have signed but didn't ratify the Istanbul Convention. So what would be the advice you would give them in order to support them making the further steps in order to finish this process?
Wow, that is such a big question. But I really like it. I think the first thing that comes to mind, and it's probably a very obvious point, but involve survivors. Involve survivors, involve specialist organizations, and make sure that they are at the center of your policy and your evaluation.
Yeah, and probably that would be easier for institution representatives to understand what's really happening.
Of course.
And then what is really missing from the lives
of course.
Women and girls who have been affected by violence.
Of course. I think, I mean, the Istanbul Convention is in many ways so progressive, and I think we're all indebted to the Istanbul Convention in the work that we do. And there are so many practical, tangible measures that countries need to implement to really give effect to that I think, you know, the overarching piece of advice is make sure that's informed by the voices of survivors. It's a framework which
help everyone.
Exactly, exactly.
So, Doron, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll meet again and
I hope so.
See what's going on with
Absolutely.
the progress.